The political panel All-Stars up shortly, whānau, but now this week's extra one-on-one and 10 with Greenpeace leader Russel on climate inflation and the reality of El Niño this election. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Kia ora, Martin. Thanks for having me on the show.
Comrade, your leadership and the activism Greenpeace drives are so important right now, especially when we have a government who have bent over backwards for the big polluters and their rich speculator mates. You have argued this government has waged a war on the environment. How have the last 3 years been?
I mean, it's been a very difficult 2.5, nearly coming up to 3 years. I mean, if you care about climate change or you care about biodiversity, we've had a government which has been absolutely relentless. It's every week they're coming up with new policies, new legislation they're ramming through Parliament on climate and biodiversity. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a very, very challenging 2.5 years. But I mean, on the other hand, I mean, we've seen a huge fight back. So we've seen it on bill after bill. I mean, the Conservation Amendment Bill, I haven't seen the final numbers. I mean, we had, 30,000 plus just through our, it's tens and tens of thousands of people. And which, when you think that this is coming at the end of this pretty challenging 3 years, I think shows that people are still willing to stand up and fight. We've got the March for Nature coming up on September 19.
Yes.
So people are not willing to give up on New Zealand in spite of the last 2.5 years of attack on nature and climate policy.
We have this insane situation where the big polluters were caught out providing the government secret policy advice to kill off Mike Smith's legal challenge to them in court, while at the same time the most powerful El Niño in 150 years is brewing and looks to peak over New Zealand. How much of a political disconnect do we have to the climate reality we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it is a remarkable thing. I mean, really what's happened is there was a period, some years ago now, where a lot of elements of the political right and within the corporate world globally decided that they were taking climate change seriously.
Yeah.
And so there was a kind of golden period where it looked like climate change would be a bipartisan issue. And it looked like major corporations were willing to take action and take it seriously. But what we've seen over the last 5 years is a reversal of that. And so the political right have associated themselves with climate denialism or climate delay, which would probably be a more accurate description of the current National Party leadership. And so we've found ourselves in the situation now where ridiculously climate change has become a partisan issue, which it should never have become, but it is. And the political right have associated themselves with climate denialism and climate delay. So that is extremely problematic.
The ASB's economists last week argued the Iran war had been settled and that economic growth was back on track, but nowhere in their analysis did they factor in the coming El Niño. The last 3 El Niño events have cost us $12 billion. Apparently, the worst one in 150 years won't cost us anything. Why is the economic impact of climate change being ignored in the run-up to the election?
It is puzzling, but I mean, I think it really is the story I've just told. So within the corporate world, I mean, let's remember Fonterra and Z Energy, who just did this process whereby they were secretly negotiating with Luxon to block citizens' right to sue Fonterra and Z Energy for the harm that their climate emissions are doing. They are part of a climate leadership group, right? So that there is a great big climate leadership group which involves major corporations where some of the very largest members of that leadership group were secretly blocking citizens' ability to actually take Fonterra and Z Energy to court for the harm that their pollution is doing. So, yeah, we've seen this, situation where these big corporates have become this. And maybe we should not be surprised. I mean, if you think about a corporation, it is a machine for making money, period, right? It has no other purpose. I mean, they come up with all sorts of purpose statements, but they don't have any other machines for making money. And so Z Energy and Fonterra are just focused on doing that. And clearly, climate change is not something that they're going to take seriously. I mean, I think the best you could hope from them is that they have a free rider approach, which is that they recognize that climate change could be a problem, but they want other people to take action to cut emissions. And of course, if every corporation and every government around the world takes a free rider approach, then we're all doomed. But that would appear to be the best interpretation you could take of New Zealand's large corporates.
Global economists are now warning that a super El Nino weather cycle this year could cause a severe shock to global food prices lasting into 2028. According to analysts at Goldman Sachs, the strength of this El Nino could cause a 15.8% surge in global food commodity prices. Can we afford to remain in denial?
Yeah, I mean, from an ordinary person's point of view, rather than a corporate point of view, this is a systemic and existential risk to us and our children and our grandchildren. I mean, the Thwaites Glacier is starting to break up, for God's sakes. The speed of the ice coming down the Thwaites has tripled over the last 5 years. I mean, this is catastrophic. And it's happening right before us. We have all the information. But obviously, we have a large vested interest, particularly in the oil industry, but also in agribusiness. Fonterra is our biggest polluter by a country mile. And agribusiness and oil and gas industry have a vested interest in blocking action on climate change for their short-term profits. And so that's the battle that we're up against. It is a classic people versus corporate battle. And so we are in the middle of that. And let's remember the successes we had, the oil and gas exploration ban. We got that over the line. The current government's been unable to reverse it. They might have changed the law, but oil and gas corporations aren't coming back because of regulatory uncertainty and civil society opposition. The fertiliser cap has had significant effects. Obviously, Fonterra and their friends are trying to undermine the cap on synthetic nitrogen fertiliser, which is a huge driver of climate emissions, but they're not winning that entirely. So, we are... And then there's the global growth in clean energy, which has been very significant and quite real, even as governments like the New Zealand government have been trying to slow it down. So, I mean, it is a two-step forward, one step back kind of situation we find ourselves in. So we shouldn't be completely gloomy about it, but it is exactly the kind of existential battle that we would expect between ordinary people and corporations who make money by destroying the planet.
Goldman Sachs analysts wrote, El Nino has already begun to affect crops, driving a drier monsoon season in India, with some regions only experiencing 25% of their usual rainfall and parts of central India only receiving 50%, which could affect supply for wheat, rice and sugarcane. What does New Zealand need to do to adapt to those realities? I mean,
I think that the key thing really is our responsibility is to cut our emissions. I mean, that has to be our primary responsibility. We have a secondary responsibility for adaptation. I agree with that. And so we're seeing that all across the country. So lots of places like Westport, and so there's going to be costs in moving them. El Niño, of course, means more droughts, particularly on the east side of the North Island. It'll mean more probably heavy weather in terms of the west coast, heavy rainfall on the west coast and Southland. But and so we need to have things like the Climate Emergency Response Fund that the current government abolished.
Yes.
We need those kind of reserves in place and an adaptation strategy. I mean, you couldn't have done... If you had set about doing the worst possible set of policies, you couldn't have done any more than what the current government's done, really.
Finally, comrade, the Fisheries Amendment Act, which was unbelievably pro-fishing industry, and the plan to allow 60% of conservation land to get sold off have all been kicked to touch until after the election. How concerned are you of a possible second term of National Act in New Zealand First in terms of the environment?
I'm not really a sporting kind of guy, but if I were to use a sporting analogy, it is the bases are loaded for this election, right? So this is a baseball situation where we have players on all plates. And so depending on which way this election goes, and obviously Greenpeace doesn't tell anyone who to vote for, that's not our role, but clearly with the Conservation Amendment Bill and the Fisheries Amendment Bill and many other things, but particularly those two bills are now sitting in select committee just waiting for the election outcome.
Right.
And so, yeah, the bases are loaded. People should be aware those bills aren't dead. Like the government talks about them as if they've disappeared, particularly the Fisheries Amendment Bill. It hasn't. It's just sitting there waiting for the election outcome. So one of the questions I think for National is in post-election negotiations, would they guarantee that the Fisheries Amendment Bill will never come back, even if New Zealand First makes it a bottom line for coalition? That would be a very interesting question to ask the National Party. But yeah, the bases are loaded. I mean, and it's not just those. I mean, you've got the LNG import terminal that's just sitting there.
Yes.
That's a multi-billion-dollar bet on fossil fuels and that fossil fuels become cheap.
Yes.
And that climate change doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And you just name it one thing after another. It is quite a consequential election for New Zealand.
Thank you, Russell, for sharing your insight and oversight this evening. All power to your arm. Good luck in your battles, comrade.
Good. Thanks, Martin.
Kia ora.